My name is Venkat Subramaniam. We're going to talk about this tool called Grunt. And of course, the first question you probably would think about is, why the term Grunt? So this fascination about how we define JavaScript. Well, there was an O'Reilly book which was published with a cover of rhinos on the cover. And so that kind of took a little interest in people. They said, okay, JavaScript, one of the earlier books has a rhino on it. So the first tool, of course, that was created for processing JavaScript was called Rhino. And the most recent tool from Oracle about processing on the JVM is called Neshorn, which is a term in German for Rhino. And you kind of guess where Grunt comes from, right? Actually, have you ever seen rhinos fight? It is fascinating. I had this wonderful opportunity of watching two rhinos fight. And I got tired watching them fight. They're worse than kids at home, right? Those of you who have children at home know this, right? They keep fighting each other. Well, the rhinos are kind of like that. They just fight each other, and they, of course, grunt quite a bit when they do that. So anyway, but we're not going to talk about rhinos here. We're going to talk about Grunt. So what is Grunt? Grunt is a tool that is to automate tasks. So we want to perform tasks on computer systems all the time. And why do we want to create tasks? Now, a lot of times, I use tasks to automate my life a lot. For example, one of the benefits you have as a programmer that a lot of other people don't have is you can program your way around your own problems. Have you ever said to yourself, you know what, it is so cool to be a doctor? Because if you're a doctor and if you don't feel well, guess whom do you go to get medicines? Well, yourself, because you're a doctor, right? You know what medicines to prescribe to yourself. Isn't that cool to be a doctor? But oftentimes we forget one thing. It is cool to be a programmer because you can program your way out of your own solutions and problems. So one of the things I do every day is when I wake up in the morning, there are certain things I'm interested in looking at. For example, there may be certain websites I want to crawl through and get some information. There are some web services where I want to pull some data. Whatever that is, and the worst way to do this is to wake up in the morning and click on these links to go look at it, right? No. Well, I'm kind of fairly a disciplined person. I wake up about the same time almost every day, 7 days a week. And about 15 minutes before I wake up, my computer system wakes up, runs a few scripts, and has a nice digest of things I want to look at, and there's a nice email waiting for me. So I log in and say, hey, somebody has sent me an email this morning. And I look at the email, it's from my past 15 minutes ago, sends me an email, and it's got all the stuff in there, and you can kind of look at it and read through it. And that really makes life a lot easier. Similarly, things to automate, want notifications to be sent to you. So you can start writing code for a lot of these things. When you're a programmer, you can program your way around it. My favorite is cron tabs. On Linux machines and Unix machines, I set up cron tabs all the time. On Windows, I have automated tasks running all the time. At certain times of the day, they wake up and they do stuff. Well, both cron tab and the automated task on Windows, what do? They wake up and they call stuff. And the minute they call stuff, that stuff that you want to run is your stuff, whatever you want to do with it, and that's when you want to perform these tasks. Now, why do I care to automate my life so much? The reason I care to automate my life so much is it is very productive. You don't waste your time doing mundane things you normally do and have these scripts and tools do it for you so you can be productive and focus on real things, and they can get the work done and have those reports to you, and you can kind of look at them. That makes your life a lot easier. And so you want to really be able to automate it. It reduces errors. The more we do things manually over and over, we introduce errors. But once you automate it and do it once, and you don't have to worry about these errors being introduced. I'm a huge fan of automated testing. I rely on automated testing a lot. And of course, the word automated testing simply means You don't run it manually, right? It's got to run automated. Now, how do you run these tests automated? You want to certainly be able to run a script of some sort, and you want that to go ahead and branch off and do stuff for you. So automated testing becomes extremely important to do. Also, a couple of other things. Continuous integration. You want to be able to check in your code, and as soon as you check in your code, you want to make sure the code compiles, all the tests pass, look at the code coverage. If the code doesn't compile, or a test doesn't pass, or a coverage is below a certain number that you are happy with, you want the build to fail, and then you want to get a notification, and so people can go fix it. Again, you want to use automated scripts for it. One of the other things I normally do is I work with a group of people, and there are certain things I follow. One of the things is when somebody checks in a code, depending on the directory in which they check in the code, it may be a Git or a Subversion, doesn't matter. The minute you check in code into a certain repository, I immediately want a hook to run and say, oh, this file was changed, and I know that this other person is interested in changes to this file and needs to review it, and an automated email goes to that person saying, hey, this file has been modified, you need to review it, and then I can have automated things go back and forth between people rather than them having to email. The check-in becomes the trigger. One of the other things I also follow in my own work is the worst way to work in an office is to email each other. How many times do you work in a company where people send emails to each other? And there are people sitting in the same floor, and sometimes even in the same cubicle, and they send emails to each other. So one rule I follow in teams I work with is zero email policy, right? You cannot send me an email, and if you send me an email, it will get the delete response, right? I don't want to get an email from you. Well, then how do you communicate with people? Well, you can have dashboards, you can have a form of wiki to communicate, and the beauty is it becomes really easy to search for things. How many times have you wasted time searching for stuff in the email, right? It's frustrating, and it's like, oh, I remember getting this email, but I don't know where that email is, and you can cut these nonsense out very easily. Again, you want to be able to automate these things. So by cutting down what Scott was saying this morning, right? The minute you get into the command prompt and start typing, you can start scripting very easily. So we all want to be able to write some of these scripts and use it. How do we go about writing these scripts? There are several tools available in the past. So let's think about some tools that have been in the past. If you've been programming for a long time, right? If you've been programming for a long time, you probably have used a tool called Make. How many of you have used Make over here? Really? That many people. That's awesome. Make is lovely, isn't it? No. Right? What happens in Make? Well, you always learn about Make the hard way, because it's got to be a tab and not a space. How many of you have landed into the problem? It's not a tab. Yeah. And you don't want to be there, right? It's frustrating. And you're looking at it, you're like, is it a tab or is it a space? I mean, you learn the hard way that it's got to be a tab. It's frustrating, right? But what did Make really do? Make gave us a nice task. And you have a task, a colon, a dependency, tab on the next line, and the action to perform, right? That's what a Make is. Very simple rules. You got an action colon, and then you have a dependency, and then you have, well, actually a rule colon dependency, a tab and an action to perform to create that rule. So you could say this particular file depends on these other files, and if these files were to change, then run this action. Very simple rule. And I had this wonderful pleasure of maintaining several Make files in early part of my career, right? You go to work and you spend hours and hours maintaining these Make files. Well, after a while, what happened? Make kind of went away, and then we had Ant. How many of you have used Ant? Quite a few of us. And Ant is lovely, isn't it? Because you could edit that XML document. How many of you wake up in the morning saying, this is a great day, I'm going to go edit more XML? Not a single person, right? No, because after working with XML for a while, you know that editing XML should be given to people in the prison, right? Nobody in the free world should be asked to edit XML. And then XML kind of faded away a little bit, and then came along what? Maven, right? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Maven. And Maven is lovely, right? Because you start Maven, and you start downloading the internet, right? And then you can have access to all of it. Somebody said there's a difference between Ant and Maven. And the difference is the creator of Ant already apologized. Right? He said, I'm sorry for doing this. I was drunk on a long flight, in cross-Atlantic flight. I created this, right? In fact, he felt so bad he doesn't even, be in our field. He's the world-renowned photographer now, Jensen Davidson. And of course, Maven is still there, and people are there are only two kinds of people, right? Somebody the other day said, I asked them, do you use Maven? They said, no, we don't use Maven. Maven uses us. Right? So that is very true as well, right? That happens. So you kind of get used to Maven, you start using it, and you kind of have to read those POM files and all of those stuff. But one of my most favorite tools, I have to admit, is Rake. Rake is beautiful. Jim Wire, somebody I admired the most, in fact, I would say, really sad that he recently passed away, but wonderful tool. I probably, if I have to admit to you, Rake is the one tool that I probably use the most. And the reason is it's a nice fluent DSL, and you're able to write Ruby code in it, and you can express very nicely the task, and it flows nicely into a Ruby syntax. It's really nice. And of course, the equivalent of Rake is Gradle, and I use Gradle quite a bit as well. Gradle was written in Groovy, and I spent quite a bit of time working with Groovy, and so I either use a Rake task oftentimes, or I end up using Gradle task. And in the same kind of line of things, what we're looking at here is Grunt. So what is Grunt? Grunt is nothing but a build tool, if you want to look at it as a build tool, but it's really a tool for us to specify these kinds of tasks and use it. That is really the purpose of Grunt, is really to express some of these dependencies and execute a few things. So, but the difference in this case is Grunt is really based on JavaScript. Now, I want to kind of draw a distinction here. We talk about DSLs, or domain-specific languages. And there are two types of DSLs. There are external DSLs, and there are internal DSLs. If you look at a tool like Make, for example, what language was Make written in, right? And then if you look at Ant, what language was Ant written in? Well, essentially, Ant is going to be requiring an XML parser to parse it and figure out what you're specifying in those. So these are external DSLs. There is another program that runs through these, processes these, and decides what you are specifying. So these are external DSLs. Internal DSLs, on the other hand, are where the code really is hosted in another host language. So in the case of Rake, for example, Ruby is the host language. In the case of Gradle, for example, Groovy is the host language. So you're not really writing a parser to parse through these content. You have a language that becomes the parser automatically, because the language syntax that you use in these DSLs, in these build things, like Rake, for example, is a Ruby syntax, Gradle, for example, is Groovy syntax, but you use a subset of this language, but you cleverly select a subset which appears to be very fluent and expressive, but it really becomes the syntax in the language that it is the host language. In the same way, Grunt is hosted as a JavaScript. So you can think of Grunt as a DSL in JavaScript, if you want to look at it that way, even though it's kind of hard to think about DSLs in JavaScript, because you're still going to see the full glory of the JavaScript syntax in it. Well, as JavaScript evolves, you will also see Grunt evolve as well, and it will become a lot more fluent as time goes on. But essentially, Grunt is written, and you're specifying things using JavaScript, so it's really a JavaScript-based tool. How do you go about installing Grunt? Well, you can install Grunt by using npm install. -g simply specifies global, and you normally install a Grunt CLI, which is nothing but a command level interface, or command line interface. So essentially, Grunt CLI gives you access to a set of tools that you can use on the command line, and you will also have to install the Grunt tool itself by saying npm install Grunt, and you can have Grunt installed. Typically, you could install it in your project that you want to use it in. Now, how do I run Grunt? So let's talk about running Grunt for a minute. So what I can do here is I can, first of all, go to the command prompt. I'm a huge fan of command prompt. I spend a lot of time here. And in this directory, I don't have anything at all. As you can see, this is an empty directory. So I'm going to say Grunt right here, and it grunts back. It says a valid Grunt file doesn't exist. So generally speaking, there is like a default file name that is expected. So in the case of a rake, you have a rake file. In the case of Gradle, you have a build file for Gradle, so Gradle.build. And then you also have files like that for different things. The make file, of course, is the make file itself is the name. So in the same way, Grunt is using a file named Grunt file. And all that it's complaining right now is you said run Grunt, but I didn't find any Grunt file. I'm sorry, I don't have a clue what to do, and it stops doing it. Right? That's all you saw over here. So it just simply tells us there is no Grunt file. Well, let's fix that real quick. I'm going to go ahead and create a Grunt file right there. So that's all I did. I just said, create a Grunt file. And let's open the Grunt file, which is empty, of course. I just created that file. And right there is the file that we're going to use, which is called the Grunt file. So what do I do within this file? Well, we got to put some stuff in this file, but I haven't done anything yet. But let's just go back here and having this empty file, let's run Grunt again. And again, it's complaining, really, I didn't find anything useful in here. And that's what it is telling us. OK, we'll fix that in a second. So we want to create a Grunt file. Actually, I should call it as a grunt.js, no wonder. So let's go ahead and move it to grunt.js. So like gruntfile.js. Grunt again, Grunt again. Let's see what it says. And in this case, of course, it says warning. You know what? I don't find anything interesting in this file. What do you have here? That's what it's complaining about, right? All right, we'll fix that in a second. So it says aborted. There's nothing to really do here. We're going to create a task. So the first task I want to create is called a default task. But before you do this, you got to introduce Grunt to what you're going to do. So you specify this thing called a module.exports. And all you are writing is, you recognize right away, a very simple JavaScript function. Now, this JavaScript function is really assigned. So this is an anonymous function we are creating. That's all it is. And we take this anonymous function and then attach it to this exports on the module. Now, this word Grunt over here, whatever you call it, that real object is a handle to the Grunt object. That object gives you a set of features that you can call into. In fact, that Grunt object, traditional to call it Grunt, but I don't care what you call it, but if you call it Grunt, it's easy to understand. But all that is important is that Grunt object says, you can talk to me and you can tell me what your tasks are. I will gather up all the details you provide for me, and then I will build a tree of dependencies I have to build, and then I can start running them. So you're going to really be talking to this Grunt object from here on. So what am I going to do with this Grunt object? Well, I'm going to go back to this Grunt object and say grunt dot, and I want to register a task for this. So I'm going to call register task over here. Well, what task do I want to register? Again, notice we are simply writing JavaScript at this point, and the task I want to register is called the default task. So obviously, the name default has a special meaning. This is a task that runs if you don't tell what task to run. So that is basically the default task, and it's a nice, good practice to have a default task because you can simply run Grunt, and you can say, if I don't tell you what to do, just do that. So traditionally, what you would really want to do for a regular Grunt default task is to run your test cases from there. So that way, by default, you say Grunt, and it runs you a test. And of course, if you want to do something special, you can always say that by name. But if you don't say anything, default will simply run the test. That's just a tradition. But you can do whatever you want to do in your Grunt task. It's entirely up to you. So in this case, I've defined a task called the default. But I got to tell him what to do for this default task. How do I go about saying that? Well, for that, all that you do is provide him a function once again. And right here in this function, I'm going to simply say hello, right? That's all I'm saying right now, just said hello. All I did was I wrote a Grunt task. So default is the name of the task. We gave the default name, and we wrote a function. It's just a pure JavaScript function. So you're going to be writing JavaScript like this, and then we simply said, I want to do a hello. That's all we said. So I registered a task, and where do I register the task? I'm registering the task with Grunt, obviously, and then I'm going to do some work. Now notice what I did just a second ago. I simply said a console.log, and I wrote hello in here. We could have run that, and it would display hello. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a grunt log.writeln, and in here I'm going to say hello. Now, what's the difference? The difference is, well, we're assuming we're running on Node, and as a result, when we are saying console.log, we're using the nodes feature. But we can separate that and say, you know what, I don't really care where I'm running this. I want to kind of have a loose coupling. So you can use grunt.log and let the log decide how to really write it. And it could be to a standard output, could be somewhere else. You can kind of have a level of indirection on it. If that makes sense to have that kind of level of indirection, you can introduce that very easily. So given this, let's go back and try this out. So I'm going to go back here and just simply type grunt one more time. And notice what it did this time. It simply said running default task. And why does it run the default task? Because we didn't tell him what to run. So he ran the default task. So I simply said grunt and he ran the default task. And of course, within the task, we just printed hello, so that ended up printing hello. But what do you do in there? Well, if you can print hello, you can do whatever you want to do with it, right? You could send emails out. You could run test cases. You could run coverage reports. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. That's a task that you call upon and have it execute stuff as you please. So that is the one that's going to run right there, and it simply displayed that hello message for us, and that's a default task. So all we did so far was we simply defined a default task that we're going to use right here, and that's what we saw in this case. So we saw how to really write the task, but sometimes you really don't want to call this file the gruntfile.js. What if you want to call it something completely different? I'm going to copy this grunt file to myfile.js, whatever you want to call it, right? So I have the file called myfile.js, and within my file, just to show the difference, I'm going to open the myfile.js, and I'm going to say hello my file, right? That's what I wrote over here in the my file. So let's close that and go back here to the command prompt. And now I'm going to say grunt, and I'm going to specify the grunt file. So grunt file, and then myfile.js, and I can specify what file to run. And you can see in this case, it printed hello my file. So you're saying, I don't want to use a grunt file. I want to simply specify which file I want to run. It's possible that you have more than one file for various different purposes, and you can say, I don't want to run that one, I want to run that one, and you can specify that. But of course, if you don't say what grunt file, then of course, it's going to simply use the file named gruntfile.js. So I'm going to get rid of the myfile.js at this point and continue to use the grunt file we just created. So we have the grunt file sitting in front of us, but what if I want to define a custom task other than the default task? What would I do, and how could I specify another task in this case? So you can specify a custom task. Whatever task you want to specify, you can certainly do that. So I'm going to change this to greet right here. And notice in this case, it's just saying hello, and the task name is called greet, and no longer it's called default. So what do? I go back here and run grunt. Even though the grunt file resides, it complains saying, I'm sorry, I don't have a default task. I cannot run it because you didn't tell me what to run in this case. So I'm going to say grunt at this point and say greet. And now you can see that it ran the hello. So you can give names for these tasks and say, I want to run that specific task with that particular name. And you can specify that name very easily. And when would you do this? If you really have a bunch of tasks and you want to only run that task. I do this sometimes when I got, JS lint to run on my code and do some static analysis on the code. Whatever it is, I need to pick what the default is. And so I don't want to tie my code to the default. It's again, a level of indirection, right? So what are we going to do here? I'm going to simply say greet dot and register a task. And the name of the task, as you would expect, is default, right? So I'm going to say default is the task I'm going to use. So we created a task called default, but with the difference though, rather than specifying a function at this point, we're going to specify what we want to run for default. And notice in this case, I'm mapping default to the greet task rather than writing a function. So this simply tells the grunt that when you don't specify what task to run, then run the default task. In turn, simply branch off and run the greet for me. Yep. Grunt. Of course, it's error. Thanks for pointing that out. So absolutely, that should be grunt. It could be greet, but not in this case. So grunt register task. Absolutely. So thank you. So grunt register task, and then you specify the default where to map to, and in this case, I want it to run greet. So now if I go back to the prompt and say grunt one more time, you can see that I didn't specify the task, but it still ran the greet task because the default is executed and default maps over to greet and was able to run. So this is the way for you to, excuse me, specify what to run actually, and pick and choose what may make sense depending on what you are, how you're organizing it. So today it may be greet, tomorrow it may be something else, and all that you have to do is just use that one line mapping default to something else that you already have predefined, or the new one you want to define. So one of the things I really like about Grunt is, not only can you do this, but you can also add parameters. Let's look at an example of adding parameters and how we would do this. So if I go back here, I have default setup right here, that's great, but I'm going to go back to this function, and I'm going to say over here, name, comma, message. So in this case, I'm going to take both a name and a message as a parameter. Now, why would you do this? You may have a task, but for the task, you may want to specify a special destination directory when you run it, right? So you may say, hey, I want to run Grunt, and I want to take all the files in this directory, and I want to deploy it over to the service, but I'm going to tell you what that service is by providing a little, a directory name or a URL or whatever that may be, right? So you want to configure it in a way that when you run this, it will take as a parameter where to put stuff. This gives you the flexibility that you don't have to modify this every time, monkey around it. This becomes a little bit more extensible, right? So you pass arguments and parameters to that. That's kind of what we want to do here. So think about this as I copy things to some place, but I want to give you what the destination is. How do you say that? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this message. Let's go ahead and say this is the message. In fact, let's say message comma name in that order so that we can use it in this order. And I'm going to say right here, the message is going to be the message I want to specify, and then we're going to specify a comma and maybe the name of the person I want to greet. Now, how do I pass the parameters to this? Well, I can go back here and I can say greet over here, but we can start putting parameters to the greet method. So we can say, for example, Joe, and then I can specify, well, first is the message. I could say hello over here, and then we could say Joe, and you can start specifying these values if you're interested in. So all that I'm doing here is, in fact, let's even make this a little bit more interesting. You could even say good day, but we'll come back to that in just a minute. So you can start specifying some of these parameters that you want to pass to. So what did I do in this case? I said hello and Joe, and that's what I'm running the default task. So if I go back and run this now, you can see that it says hello Joe. But I want to go a little further with this, and I can say grunt, for example. I can call greet itself, and here I want to say, hello, and then let's say Raj over here. So it says hello Raj, but I even can go put a little, double-quoted string. I could say good day, Raj, and you can see that it says good day Raj right in the bottom. So we could specify different parameters this way as well. So you can start giving details. Now notice what I did in this example. I simply used the default, and the default simply said, I'll just call greet with hello and Joe. Again, think about this in a realistic situation. You want to copy files to a destination, but if you don't say where to put it, it automatically picks a name that you've chosen as a default, but your code is quite flexible to handle that parameter. So you can just run grunt and it copies stuff to the same place that you want to copy it to. Occasionally you could also run grunt and say deploy and specify a certain directory, and it will put stuff in that directory rather than the default directory that you've assumed in your code. So that kind of flexibility you get very easily by using these parameters. So you can see how you can specify that in the command prompt very easily and have it run through. Well, that's great. We were able to send parameters to this function. So how do you write it? You write it like you normally write a function in JavaScript with parameters, and then you can start specifying colon-separated set of values, and you can provide it. But this brings up one small problem. What if I go back over here and I run grunt this time, but I only specify greet, and I do not specify the message or the name, and it tells us very nicely undefined, right? Because JavaScript, if you don't find something, it simply treats those values as undefined. So it printed undefined, comma, undefined, right? Well, that's a bit annoying, right? Because if you're trying to copy stuff to different directories, you definitely don't want it to copy stuff to an undefined directory, right? You want it to come back to you and say, I'm sorry, I didn't really find this. You're missing an argument I'm expecting. Could you please help me out here? Can you give me this argument? Right? You want it to come back and tell you that it needs some information. Well, for that you have to do a little bit more work. So to do that work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this code, and I'm going to say right here in the function, I'm going to check if the message came through. So if message is equal to undefined, or if the name is equal to undefined, right? So I'm asking him if either the message or the name is actually undefined. And in this case, if either the message or the name is undefined, what do I want to do? I want to say, I'm sorry, this is wrong, and I want to bail out by giving an error. So to do that, what we're going to do here is we're going to use a grunt.warn. So we're going to give a warning message to this particular code. So we're going to use a grunt.warn message. And what does this warn really do? It creates a warning message. I'm going to say, please provide message and name, right? And name. And you could even say, for example, comma usage, and you could say grunt, for example, and then you could say, message hello, and then you could say, Joe, or something like that, right? You could say, hey, Jane, hello, Jane. You could specify some value that you want to write. So you could start putting some message like this. Well, let's go ahead and try this again. I'm going to run grunt greet this time, but notice what happened this time. It said warning, please provide a message and a name. Then it gave this usage, grunt hello Jane, and then of course it said, I'm going to stop right here. So the minute you see a warning, grunt terminates and says, I'm done, I found something wrong. I really like this, right? How many times have you seen programmers, ignore warning and keep going? A lot of times, isn't it, right? And what happens when you ignore warnings and keep going? You probably are producing poor quality code, and you're creating a technical debt, and someday something fails, and you realize it's because of this warning. I remember I was invited to work on a project, and I was a consultant, and then sometimes you have to kind of, use your judgment what you want to do. So I sat down, and the minute I compiled the code, there were, about 250 warnings in the code. And I looked at this and said, really? You guys have 250 warnings? And then I said to myself, you know what, they called me there to get the work done, not to preach to them. And I pretended I'm not going to look at the warnings. I'm just going to write the code they asked me to write. I'm just a consultant on the job. I'll finish the job and go, right? And I started coding. About 5 minutes later, my little brain, like there's angel and devil in your head, right? So the devil kind of wakes up and says, but do you know what that warnings are? So now I'm curious to know what the warning is. So I go look at the first warning, and the first warning said, if flag single equals true, did you need double equals? I'm like, damn, that cannot be true. And you can imagine what the second warning was. It's even more scary, right? And I said to myself, why am I writing code on this project? This is dead on arrival. And why would you want to put good money after bad money, right? So immediately I stopped, and called the team and said, guys, I really don't want to be, a jerk here, but this is not the warnings you want to be programming in. Did you ever see what these warnings actually are saying, right? And then so he immediately said, hey, split this across the team, you fix this warning, you fix this warning. And one of the things I did was I turned on treat warnings as errors. Because if there's a warning, I want my compilation to fail and tell me that something is wrong, right? So I treat warnings very seriously. I remember one day a programmer desperately calls me and says, hey, Venkat, I've spent an hour on this problem. I cannot figure out how to compile this code. Could you please come and help me? So I go across floors to this programmer. I sit down next to him and I said, let's look at it. And I compile the code to see what the compilation error is. And it said, about 150 warnings and this one error. And I said, what did you call me to fix? Did you call me to fix any of these warnings or this error? Oh, just this error. And I said, why not the warnings? Oh, because the compiler doesn't stop you from running the code because of warnings. I said, but I will. So you fix the 150 warnings and call me, and I will come and help you with this one compilation error, right? That's how I get really angry when I see warnings. So I like this approach where it says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to run. And the minute it sees the warning, it stops as a showstopper and stops it. But of course, there's always this escape clause, isn't it? So notice what I'm going to do here. In fact, it kind of gave a clue to us that what you can do. So I can specify in a grunt a greet, and it tells me that a message. But there is this little thing called minus force, dash force. You can use that. So you can specify greet and specify the force. And notice what it did. It combined to you, and then it still ran the code, right? And it said undefined, undefined. So this is when you're like, yeah, I know there's warning, but I still want to continue to run the code. In software development, that's called hope, right? So sometimes we have that. We have this hope that keep going, something, it will still work, right? So you can use force to continue a little bit further. And if you know that people are going to do this, you can actually prevent them from doing it by changing the warning to fatal. So let's understand what the difference between warning and fatal is. So let's say over here we did this, and I'm going to say grunt.log. Let's say write line, and in this case I'm going to specify, you got past warning, right? So if I run this code, you can see it tells me you got past warning because you went through the warning and you came. And if you really know there are people like this at work, you don't want to really help them get through this, you can say grunt.fatal, and then you can say over here, are you kidding, right? And you can specify that, and then of course, grunt.log.writeLine, right? So, you did, right? You can write that. So you can say, I really don't want you to get past this. It's a fatal error. I don't want you to get through. So if you run this, you can see now, it says that you are, warning, you got past, and then it says fatal error, are you kidding? And it boom stops at this point, and it doesn't go any further. Don't try 4 minuses before force to see if you can get through fatal. It doesn't work, right? So what is the difference between the warning and fatal? And you get to pick and choose. Do you want to just give a warning and let them run at risk, or do you want to just say, this is really, foobarred, I can't really work with it, I'm going to just throw a fatal error and stop it. So you can do some of these things very easily. But we wrote one task, we wrote a default task. So what if I really want to have multiple tasks? How can I really do that? So we can run multiple tasks very easily by registering a set task. To understand this, I'm going to use this example right here as the default. So I'm going to go back to this, and let's go ahead and get rid of some of these guys. Actually, I'll get rid of all the things in here. And let's go ahead and write this little task. So I've registered a task called default, but within the default, I'm going to say running default to me means I'm going to set up, first of all, do the work, and then I'm going to ship. So we're going to define these tasks. So grunt.register task, and the task I'm going to register here is called, let's call it setup, right? So I'm going to register a setup task. And what do I do in this? I'm going to write a function. We'll come back to that function in a minute. And then I'm going to write a grunt register task one more time. This one's going to be a work task. And all I'm going to do within the work task is I'm going to write a function, and I'm going to simply say here grunt, and I'm going to simply specify, let's go ahead and say doing the hard work. And then finally, I'm going to say grunt dot, let's say register task, and here I'm going to go ahead and write this as ship, and all that I'm going to do in the ship is function will go ahead and say, let's go ahead and say in this particular case, we'll say grunt.log.writeLine, and then we will simply say, deploy and party, right? So I got all these functions done so far. But what about the setup method? I haven't done anything in the setup method. How do we handle that? Well, it turns out we got to understand a few interesting things in JavaScript. So I'm going to take a break from this code. I'll come back to this in a second and see how this is going to work. But I want to look at one other example before we go further. So let's look at a sample.js for a second. This is a pretty interesting feature in JavaScript. I'm actually going to come back to this in a second. So let's actually open all the files in this directory. That way I can just look at one file. So here's my sample.js I'm going to bring in. So where's that file? Well, let's touch sample.js. So I'm going to bring in the sample file. So what do I do in the sample? Well, in the sample file, what I'm going to do is look at one interesting feature in JavaScript. You probably are aware of this already, but it's well worth to kind of exploit some of the things that JavaScript can do for us. So I'm going to have a function called foo, and I'm going to say in here, actually let's write a function called max, and I'm going to say function a comma b, and simply say in this case, if a is greater than b, I want to return, actually let's use the other operator. So if a is greater than b, I want to return a, otherwise I want to return b over here, right? So we'll just say return on it. So we can easily call this. I'm going to simply say, 2 and 3, for example, and use those two values. Well, actually, in this case, I better call them max, right? So I'm going to call max and 2 and 3. So you can see that it did give us that value just to make sure it's actually doing the job. Let's do a max and 4 and 2, for example, and it did bring the other value. So that seems to be working, right? But what if we don't call this with that, but I'm going to call 2, 3, and 1, right? And you run this, and you say, damn, that's awesome. JavaScript is really smart, isn't it? Well, actually what happened in this case is we are passing more parameters than what the function is expecting. Now, what would Java do, or C# do, or C++ do if you pass a wrong number of parameters? It would complain, scream, and barf at you, right? Well, JavaScript treats like a guest in its house, right? It says, you know what, that's okay, and then kind of walks around very quietly. So what really happened in this case? Well, it simply ignored this value. We didn't even use it. So if I put 11 here, you can see that you got a wrong result, right? So what's happening really? What's really happening is these names called A and B really are bogus. They really don't have any specific meaning to it. So what does that really mean? So let's take one example here, right? I've got 4 people here. Well, I know Usha's name right here. I know Arvin's name right here. And how dare if I say that there are only 2 people here in the front rows? That would be kind of incorrect, right? But I know 2 people's name. That's exactly what we did here. A and B are known names. But that doesn't mean that's how many people I have here. There are more people obviously here, except that I've not gotten to know their names at this point. So in other words, that A and B and the remaining people are still here, except I don't know their names to go refer to them based on a named parameter. But if I get rid of this for a second and then run the code one more time, you can see in this case, okay, that gave an error because it doesn't have a clue what this is. But let's go ahead and say 1 for a minute and return that. Notice that simply returned 1. What does all these parameters mean? So now I can simply say, let's return arguments 0. So this is again a feature in JavaScript where the name arguments really is a special name. It represents really the input parameters being given to you. So how many people are here in the front rows? I'm going to say that's 5 people in the front row. That's my arguments list. And in this particular case, I didn't care to give any name for any one of them. But I can go a step further, and I can specify right here A comma B. And notice it still works the same way because I do know the names of 2 people, but I'm still aware of the fact that there are 5 people here in the front rows. So that is the argument still, and I can completely choose to ignore A and B. If I want to, I can use them. It's up to me. So now we can start using this very effectively, the argument. So this is a very special variable in JavaScript that really tells me what the real parameters that a method receives. So in other words, how many parameters can you pass to a function in JavaScript? And the short answer is as many as you want to. So unlike Java and C# and C++, where the function definition, line number 1, tells you how many parameters you can pass, in the case of JavaScript, the call side determines how many parameters you can actually pass. So line number 5 tells you how many parameters you can pass, not line number 1, and the code must be willing to deal with the variable number of parameters that you really are passing. So how do we go about dealing with this? So now that we saw that, let's get back to our grunt file and see what we're going to do. Notice in this case I have a method called setup with a 1, 2, and 3, but I can use that very easily in here by simply saying, I can simply say if arguments.length is greater than 1 or 0 rather, and then I can simply say at that point for var I equal to 0, I less than arguments.length I plus plus, and then I can start writing at this point grunt.log.writeLine, and I can say arguments I, and I can start printing that value. I'll just use write instead of writeLine, and then I could say a plus a comma, and then of course I can, at the very end of this, I can simply say grunt.log.writeLine, and then I could specify maybe a few dots and close it. So that is what I did. I used the arguments to loop through a variable number of arguments. So this gives us a little bit more than what we saw a few minutes ago. We said we're going to take a message and a name, but don't be restricted to that. You can pretty much write a function where the number of parameters could be any number you want to, right? As long as you're willing to use the arguments and you make this very dynamic, you have the power of JavaScript on your hand. As long as you can understand JavaScript, you can go ahead and use it. So in this case, you could call a task, and the number of parameters you specify with the task is entirely up to you. You could specify 1, 2, 3, 4, and very smartly what you can build is, if you give me one parameter, I will assume it is this. If you give me 2, I'll assume you gave me these 2 other configurations. If you give me 3, and you can start building your interface based on the number of parameters you receive, and you can model it the way you want to. Assuming I wrote all of that correctly, let's go ahead and give this a try and run this and see how this is going to look like. So notice in this case, I've called a default as setup 1, 2, 3, which is going to run through the arguments we saw and then work and ship. So if I run grunt over here, you can see it says running setup 1, 2, 3, and then it printed 1, 2, and 3 that we wrote. And then, of course, do work is printing, doing the hard work, and run ship task is going to say, deploy and party. So you can see that how this is going to provide the details that we just wrote. So it can be very dynamic and flexible. So we wrote multiple tasks in this case and implemented that using this particular approach. Well, okay, that's great, but I want to know what tasks are available that I could use. So you could go back here and you can ask it that, but unfortunately that's not very elegant, but you can say grunt help for a minute, and it will list to you all the tasks available, and you can see in this case it's listing the task available. It says there's a setup custom task, a work custom task, and a ship custom task. You can start describing these tasks with names, and then nicely it will say setup and what does setup mean, and work, what does work mean. You can write documentation for those and describe them if you want to. There are also plugins available instead of this, and if you use a plugin, you can run available tasks, and it would list to you what other tasks are available. So if you don't like this, go ahead and use the plugin for available tasks, and there are quite a number of Grunt plugins available to do that as well, and you can use that very easily. Well, that's great, but we want to push this a little bit further. We wrote multiple tasks, and when we wrote multiple tasks, what happened is you ran the default, and the default ran a series of tasks for you. You could have run other tasks manually yourself by specifying what those tasks are. Well, that's great so far. But there are times when you want to take a particular task, but you want to repeatedly run that one task, but for a series of values. As an example, it could be the case where you have a series of parameters available, maybe people's name given to you, and you want to take each person's name and you want to generate a configuration file for that specific person or for their account, and so you may automate a task of creating stuff for you very quickly. I do this quite often. I would have a group of people that I have to work with. This could be students registering in my classes, could be employees who are interested in using a certain service. And what would I do? I would take these names coming in, but I want to run through a set of tasks for each of these names, but I want to produce a different output file specifically for those people, and I want to generate that very quickly. So how do I do that? Well, for that, we would first start using what is called a grunt config. And you normally put this way in the top, and notice in the case of this config, I'm going to mark this as, this is greet, and I'm going to say friend is going to be Sarah, and a colleague is going to be Jan. So in this case, Jan is going to be my colleague at work, but this is purely a JavaScript object that we are creating, right? It's a simple JavaScript property object. So we create the greet colon and specify what that is, and that is the property we have available on our hand. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and put that up here on the top as the greet config function. So we have that. But now where it becomes really helpful is we can start using that. So notice I'm registering what is called a register multitask. So in this case, I register a multitask. and I gave it a name called greet, as you can see, but within the function, I can leverage that value. So I say this dot target and this dot data, and the target is going to be this value right here, and the data is going to be this value right here. So it gives you this combination of what is the name that you are associating that becomes the target, and the other one becomes the value you're associating with it. Again, what you can do is you can start associating this with different deployment settings that you want to put together, or you can use it for any other purposes you're interested in. So in this case, of course, I'm just going to print this information out. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that's going to look like. So I'm going to say grunt.log.writeLine, and in this case, I'm going to simply say I have the person, and I'm going to specify, and maybe a value here, colon, and then specify, let's go ahead and say hello to, so say hello to, and maybe a colleague, whatever it is, and then I'm going to specify, let's say over here, let's say name here, right? So we use this person and name, but remember, we only wrote this task once called greet. We're not passing any parameters to this function, but instead the parameter is going to be fed into it by Grunt. So we use the target and we use the data, but think of these as stream of data suppliers that it's going to keep firing to you with the binding of the target. So how does this work when we call this? So I'm going to go ahead and call Grunt over here with greet as the task to run. Oh, wait a minute, I made a syntax error. Let me go ahead and fix it. Line number 15 is unhappy with me. So what did I do in line 15? So right there is the register multiple tasks, and I have the function that's being given to me, and of course I have to close that other function we are creating, the register function. There we go. So go back and run this, and notice this time it ran it for each one of the value pairs that we wrote in there without any effort at all, right? So this becomes much easier to start automating a series of things that you want to bring in and run. And those values, of course, could come from external files also, so you can make this very flexible. So it said in this case, hello to friend and hello to colleague, and it was able to run that separately, so you can have that kind of power on your hand as well, if that makes sense to run something along those lines. So you can see the power of Grunt that it provides. But that's not the end of it. We saw how we can keep writing JavaScript in Grunt, but you can also use a number of utilities. And there are so many other plugins available. So before you do any particular task, take a minute to see if there's a plugin available, and if you can simply use it, then you don't have to be writing all that code because that's already done. But one of them is the file utility that is pretty useful to use, and you can use this to create stuff very easily. Let's look at an example of the file utility, how we will go about using it. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. The only file I have is the grunt file right now, and I'm going to say register task one more time. I'm going to get rid of the other things that we have in here. We don't care about that for this example. So I've got a register task. I've got a function called greet right now. And let's see what we're going to do within this code for a second. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be, let's call this as build for lack of better words. So I'll call this as build. So what am I going to do within the build? Well, I'm going to say grunt dot, and I'm going to ask the file utility to come in, and I'm going to ask make dir, and I want to ask it to create a distribution directory. Where does this dist come from? So var dist equals, I'm going to specify dist is the file name that I want to create, right? So right there is the description I gave. So this is called the build command. So I'm going to use this again. So we could simply say, well, let's just call build. So if I go back here and say grunt and, well, before that again, notice that's the only file that's there, grunt, and then I'm going to call build, which is the task I want to execute. So it ran the command. If I do a ls, you can see the dist directory has been created for us. So that's, again, a little utility you could use to go ahead and create the directory by using things like make dir. Along the same lines, you can also ask it to copy a file. So how do I copy a file? Well, let's say I want to make a copy of a file. I could say file.copy, and the file I want to copy is, let's say, etc. host file, and I want to copy it to where? I want to copy it to dist, and then I'm going to say host for a minute. So I could go back and run this command one more time and look at dist over here. Oh, that didn't do it. So copy file. So I want to copy the file, and I'm going to run the dist over here, build over here, and then, it's an error. So warning, object has no method, so I obviously called it wrong. So let's see, copy a file. I'm going to just use the copy command. So let's go back here and say copy. And this is the source directory, host, etc. Host is the file I want to copy, and then I want to copy to the dist host directory. That's the location where I want to copy it to. So let's see what happened really in here. Oh, I know why. This is called /dist, but it's in the current directory. Details, right? So go run this, and let's see the dist over here, and you can see the host file sitting in here. That's basically the value you saw. Finally, of course, you could throw this away by calling the delete method. So you could say, in this case, I want to say delete, and I want to get rid of course, be careful what I'm getting rid of. I want to get rid of the dist directory. I'll just simply say dist over here that I marked here as a variable. So I'm going to nervously run that to make sure I don't blow away other things in my directory. So there we go in my file. So that ran it. Well, this, of course, has a little bit of a check here. It goes from the current directory downwards. And if you really want to go elsewhere, there are other commands you can use more cautiously. So there's a bit of a safety net built in a little bit into it. So we saw how we can use some of these file commands. But one of the things we also often do is reading JSON files. And you can easily read JSON files also. Let's look at a quick example how to do this. So I'm going to say npm over here, init, and this is going to ask me a bunch of questions. Grunt sample, I'm just going to take the default, blah, blah, is the description I'm going to write. Entry point is that file, no test file right now, no Git repository right now, no keywords, no author. So I'm just taking the defaults most of the one. Is it okay? Yes, I'm good with it. So it just created a package.json file. That's all it did. Now we can use that and we can start reading that file, for example. So we can go back here to the task and we can say, I want to store this into pkg equals grunt.file.readJSON, and I can specify that file package.json. Let's see what it really brought in. So grunt.log, and I'm going to say write line, and let's display what's the package. So grunt again, I'm going to go back and run this, and I'm going to run grunt and say build, which is what I've been running here, and it really brought in an object. Let's take a look at what this object really contains. Well, I'm going to say our package.name, for example, and then I'm also going to display package.version. Those two are values in here, so version. And then we can go back and take a look at running the build, and you can see that it brought that file name. So anything that was in the file, it was able to pull that in and read it. So that's pretty easy to read JSON files. You can take a look at the API commands for a lot of other commands available to go read other files and contents. Very powerful set of tools to work with files and manipulate files, and not only manipulate files, but take actions based on a certain file's content and what have you. So there are quite a number of APIs built around it. There's also, like I said, there's a number of plugins available for Grunt as well, and then you can use any of those plugins to get your work done. So that gives you an example of what Grunt can do. So to summarize what we talked about here, Grunt is essentially a nice little tool. It's based on JavaScript. I often consider this like a DSL written in JavaScript. And all that it gives us an ability is to really define tasks. And what you do in it is entirely up to you for your project. For typically heavy JavaScript-based projects, you will have Grunt tasks available to do various things. For example, if you want to bring in a set of library files and then install them in a certain directory, configure them to a certain extent to your project and start using it, and then you want to run tests on it, automate it, you want to deploy the right files. How many times you want to deploy a particular project, and you don't want to manually deploy files because you forget to deploy a file. Sometimes you forget the files in the wrong location. And every minute you waste in doing these things is a minute wasted from doing real work and improving ourselves and the project we're working on. So by automating ourselves using these tools, we can not only automate the way and be productive, we can get to focus on doing other fun stuff rather than manually doing stuff. So you can use some of these tools very effectively. And like I said, Grunt is really driven with JavaScript. You can write as much JavaScript as you want in it, but chances are you're not going to write as much JavaScript using Grunt itself because there are quite a number of plugins you could use as well. I hope you found that useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. Well, that brings us to the end of today. And we'd like to thank you all for participating in the GIDS.pep and Model Day.